So, we have ourselves a few articles here, and a lot of people are panicking about it, but I'm going to be explaining to you guys why it is that we probably should have seen this coming. And oh, by the way, I think I can do a little bit of a lap around and tell you guys that to a certain extent I was somewhat right, as we are now seeing that young males, 12th graders in particular, Gen Z, are starting to become much more conservative. Before we get started on this, guys, I want you to know there's going to be two separate articles that we're going to be reading. One is a Fox News article that was recently released, and then we're going to be looking at a Forbes article that kind of foretold of this, and I'll also be leaving other links in the description box for you guys. But we need to be asking ourselves the question, why is it that young men are suddenly becoming more conservative? Well, there's all kinds of answers to this question. Wokeness in schools, left-leaning propaganda in video games. You see, after a while, if you keep trying to push an agenda on somebody, after a while, they're going to begin to fight back. They're going to begin to do the exact opposite. Now, guys, I'm going to touch on this later on in the video, but I want to go ahead and get this out of the way now. And I'm giving you guys my personal thoughts really quick. You guys feel free to disagree if you want to, but I want to go ahead and start this video before we get to the articles and come up with some form of assessment. I want you guys to kind of go ahead and know this now. There's a lot of debates out there on generations. And what I mean by generations is we've got the silent generation, we've got the baby boomer generation, and we've got the Generation X. You've got millennials, and now you've got Generation Z. I personally think Gen Z, I think it should be Gen Y, then Gen Z, but still at the same time, that's kind of what we've been labeled with. Now, I was taught in school when I was a recent university, and then, of course, the last time I was community college, that the silent generation is normally classified as 1928 to like 1945, or 1926 to 1945. Baby boomers is typically classified as 45 to 65, and Gen X is typically seen as 1966 to 1979, and everything beyond that is millennial. I personally disagree with that. I personally think that Gen X is really 1966 to 1986, possibly 87. And then you have Generation Y, 1988 to 1998. And then, of course, you have everything post 1998 would be Gen Z. I'm kind of stammering a little bit, but trust me, the stammering does in fact get fixed. I've also mentioned before the fatherly.com study, which showed that conservative households were having 2 kids per one liberal household. A lot of times, suburban families choose not to have kids until a little bit later on in life. I know somebody's going to say it's anecdotal, but still at the same time, though, this typically tends to happen. Conservatives typically tend to have more kids, so therefore there's going to be a bigger advantage when it comes to overall voting. By the way, it's in all 50 states of the country, not just the very, very red states. I just figured I'd go ahead and toss that out there. Also, something else, too, to consider is that it's very, very possible that a lot of these guys are becoming much, much more socially conservative. But then again, though, at the same time, when you actually read into the article and listen to the professor who talked about this, it is very likely that it's not just social, but it's also fiscal. And I'll be explaining that to you guys as well, especially when we look at the first article. So make sure you guys stick around for the full piece because it's a lot to talk about, but I think we know the real reasons why it is that young men are starting to become more conservative. And I think that the initial thing that would make you think that is good old-fashioned feminism, because when you keep telling men that they are toxic, this is probably what you're going to get. Okay, so this right here is the article from Fox News, and there's another one from Forbes as well, but this right here is talking about the basically the identity of 12th grade boys. Okay, now think about this really quick. You got to ask yourself a question. Why in the world would these 12th grade boys suddenly be becoming more conservative? Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is that there's a fatherly.com study, an article which was released by Yahoo News, by the way, which is not a right-leaning outlet, that showed you that, conservative households have 2 kids per one liberal household. I'll go much, much more in depth in the next section of this video, but let's go ahead and take a look at this. High school boys are trending more conservative than in previous years, while girls on the same age are now moving overwhelmingly to the left. According to a study by the University of Michigan, 12th grade boys are nearly twice as likely to call themselves conservative versus liberal, with the gap steadily growing in recent years. Girls, however, identify themselves as liberal at a rate of about 30%, up sharply from 2015. Psychotherapist Thomas Kirstein joined Fox and Friends Tuesday to share his thoughts on the morning future. Now, with that right there being said, I'm going to go ahead and play some of that for you guys, and I'm going to come back on the other side and finish up the article.
found that 12th grade boys are nearly twice as likely to identify as conservative, which is a sharp increase from previous trends. However, when it comes to 12th grade girls, we see the opposite. They lean more liberal, from 19% in 2012 to 30% last year. Our next guest is a psychotherapist who says these findings make total sense. Thomas Kirsting joins us right now to explain. What do you mean it makes perfect sense?
I mean, you look at everything, all the messaging in society, it's sort of like, everything is about advancing women, minorities, and so forth. And young men, young boys are kind of being left out. They're sort of being left behind. And then you have politicians out there saying, like, the number one problem in America is white men and things of that nature. So I think young, 12th grade boys are kind of seeing through this. And then you take away, the pickup trucks. I just saw a story about that. Like, they want to get rid of pickup trucks. And if you go down south, probably the majority of senior boys that drive are driving pickup trucks. So it's sort of like, all right, we're creating this idea that if you're a male, that there's something wrong with that and that you're bad.
Well, so this is kind of a seismic shift. In this article from thehill.com, they said as recently as the late 2000s, liberal boys occasionally outnumbered conservatives. Back in the Carter era, both boys and girls leaned liberal. Back in the 70s, they were more to the left. Mm-hmm. And now for young men to become predominantly conservative at an alarming rate to Democrats, that could actually impact some elections.
I believe so. So the other thing, too, the Carter era, liberalism was much different than it is today. It's gone so far, so extreme. And like I pointed out earlier, I think young men are starting to see this. You look at just college enrollment, for example. I talked about 60-40. There's also over 500 women's centers in colleges throughout the nation, and only a handful for young men. And I see a lot of this in my private practice, Steve. A lot of young guys falling behind. They feel like they can't advance because there's nothing really there to help advance them, because the idea is that men have always dominated, which is partially true, and we want women and everybody to advance, but we can't do it at the expense of another group.
Okay, so if this survey is true and 12th grade boys are more conservative than they are, an astonishing number, what happens to them when they go to college? Because that, for the most part, is the incubator of the progressive movement.
I think it depends on their household where they come from, too. So, like college, there's a lot of indoctrination going on. But a lot of kids I see when they go off to college, they will go to a university, a lot of boys in particular, and they are smothered with a lot of this liberalism and left stuff. But some of them get sucked into it, some of them don't. And when you hear the term conservative, right, it's perceived by the left as something terrible. I look at conservatism as the following: of faith, family, and country, and being, and as far as a male, being a protector and a provider and treating women with respect and everybody else with respect. It's not what it's being portrayed to be.
All right, great analysis of the numbers. Tom, thank you very much for joining us live.
I would argue that a good portion of this is, in fact, true. You see, the way that the left loves to talk about young men, constantly calling them toxic, telling them that they're no good, telling them that they're basically what they're doing is they're telling them that they are a problem. Okay, that's what they're primarily doing in a sense. They're telling young men that they are actually a problem and that, you're just too toxic. And also something else to go on top of that, girls nowadays are a lot less dateable. Now, why women may be going a little bit further to the left, that right there is one hell of a mystery. But then again, at the same time, if your natural inclination is to not like the opposite sex sometimes, then yeah. Now, a lot of these girls don't seem to realize that there are these differences between men and women. Okay, there are very, 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 very big differences. For example, men, they love to foster testosterone. We naturally do that. We're natural providers. We're natural protectors. We have instincts that automatically send us to protect kids, protect them. Women, on the other hand, I have no idea what's going on with them in recent years, but they tend to be more nurturing types. So it's really weird that we would be in this situation. But then again, though, given the rise of liberalism, which, by the way, has gone way too far to the left, and conservatism is beginning to rise for men on the right, it does not shock me that this actually happened. I didn't think it was going to happen this fast, but obviously it did. And as I've mentioned before, I am working on a bit of a series on the crisis that we're going to have with young men here in the near future. Now, with that right there being said, I'm going to go ahead and look at a few more things in this article. So the numbers represent a shift from previous generations when young men and women leaned in similar numbers. everything is about advancing women and minorities and so forth. Christine had noted, which you guys saw earlier, suggesting that this may be pushing more young males away from liberalism. And you've also seen these things in schools where you see teachers getting uppity with their students. And of course, a lot of these educators are in fact women. Now, I'm not doing this to bash women or anything. I love ladies, but the problem is this here. It seems to me that women are more inclined to push it, especially in lower education levels, meaning like, let's say K1 through K11. They typically tend to be the bulk of the educators, and more willing to just go ahead and go along with it. Something else too, and this right here goes back to something Steven Crowder says. Suburban women, for example, tend to be more agreeable. I know some ladies are probably going to disagree with that, but they tend to be much, much more agreeable, meaning they're much, much more inclined to go along with what the media may be telling them. Men, on the other hand, we typically tend not to do that. But then again, though, there are some men out there who, quite frankly, are not very bright, so we're just going to leave it at that. Now, I see a lot in my private practice, a lot of young guys are falling behind. They feel like they can't advance, so there's nothing really there to help advance them, because the idea is that men have always dominated, which is partially true. And we want women and everybody to advance, but we can't do it at the expense of another group. Of course, Florida, you see this right here. Christine said that liberalism in 2023 is so extreme compared to decades before. This, of course, you guys know is true. I look at conservatism as the following of faith, family, country, and being, as far as male being a protector and provider and treating women with respect. Everybody else with respect, it's not what it's being portrayed to be. You see, even if you treat someone with respect at this moment in time, next thing you know, you're going to be labeled as toxic. It's just the way that it is. See what else we got here. According to the Hill's analysis, the trend is a striking departure from as recently as the late 2000s, when the number of boys identifying as liberal was 21% in 2009, but down to a low of 13% in 2022. The number of girls identifying as conservative, on the other hand, is nearing all-time lows, making up just 12% of high school seniors, the study found. Wasn't it Jesse Waters, speaking of Fox News, wasn't it him who a while back basically went on his show and said this here?
Democrats are dominating the cities. I mean, absolute dominations, 85 to 15 types of spreads. Also, single women are breaking for Democrats by 30 points. And this makes sense when you think about how Democrat policies are designed to keep women single. But once women get married, they vote Republican. Married women, married men go for Republicans by double digits. But single women and voters under 40 have been captured by Democrats. So we need these ladies to get married. And abortion is really driving turnout. In some cases, it drove turnout more than inflation. They're also teaching our children in schools. So you have hardcore Democrat females in school with your kids for 8 hours a day. So there's a brainwashing pipeline that runs through women and children, and it's starting to show up on Election Day. Single women are voting for Democrats by 30 points.
37.
37 points.
Yeah.
This new generation is totally brainwashed, because a lot of these single women that vote 37 spreads for Democrats are teaching all of our younger generation in these schools, and they're polluting their minds, and then they grow up, and then they're in their 20s, and then they vote.
Now, really quick, before we go any further, there is this other take that I do want to look into real quick. About a minute and 23 seconds. This was Tim Pool going on about it last week. I just want you guys to pay very close attention.
From the Post-Millennial, 12th grade American boys trend conservative report. Take a look at this. General knowledge may say that the more and more young people are identifying as liberal. According to new data, 12th grade high school boys are twice as likely to identify as conservative as compared to liberal. In annual surveys over the past few years, data pulled from Monitoring the Future, an organization, has shown that about a quarter of high school seniors identify as conservative or very conservative. Only 13% of the 12th grade boys identify as liberal. That's interesting. An image from a graph from the book Generations, The Real Differences Between Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, Boomers, and Silence, and What They Mean for America's Future by Jean Twenge, went somewhat viral online. The graph excludes moderate students, but of those high school seniors that do identify politically, around 65% of boys were conservative, while only around 31% of girls identified that way. Let me tell you what this means. I'm going to say it and just be as shockingly offensive as I can. This means that girls will start to skew conservative. Why? Young boys are object oriented, or I should say, males are object oriented and females are subject oriented. It's really that simple. Guys, when they talk to each other, talk about granular facts, goals, and accomplishments, and females talk about feelings. It's not absolute, it's just generally speaking.
A good portion of that I agree with. As far as women going conservative, I'm not so sure. Typically what tends to happen is that women typically tend to start going more conservative in their late 20s. And sometimes even their early 30s. Now, educators, teachers, I may have mentioned this earlier. Of course, a lot of these ladies do intend to swing a little bit left, and they're a little bit more agreeable as far as actually pushing the content is concerned. I really and truly don't know why that is the case. I'm not a psychologist or a psychotherapist, but still at the same time, though, this typically tends to happen. But I do want to say this right before I go any further. One of the reasons why it is that conservative males or males could be going conservative, especially in their 20s or at least in their teens, they could be seeing other men in their 20s going conservative as well. I keep thinking to myself that he had while he was reading that article or earlier in that particular piece, he also had Charlie Kirk was actually on the screen. Something you got to understand. Look, I don't particularly care that much for Ben Shapiro, but I will give the man credit in one area. Even though we do agree 90% of the time on issues, I just don't really care for him that much as a person. It's just kind of squeaky, irritating. But here's the thing about Ben. Ben, for the most part, he would go to these colleges and do these speeches. So you're getting an additional conservative voice. Matt Walsh has done it. Michael Knowles has done it. Charlie Kirk has done it. Candace Owens has done it. There's a lot more conservative voices going out there. There's also a lot more conservative YouTube channels. I think, for example, Alexa Clark, she's got one thing called Politics or something like that there. That's geared more towards women, which, by the way, I do think that's actually going to cause an effect as well. And regardless of what you may or may not think of that person, you do have a lot more conservative influencers coming out there on the platform and actually trying to help out with this problem. Basic common sense, more moderate to conservative leaning takes. And after a while, if you keep hearing that, after a while, you're about to start agreeing with some of that. Now, to me personally, I think that's actually a good thing. My audience typically tends to be between the age of, I'll put it this way here. My audience, for the most part, is a graphic that I mentioned earlier. It's mostly millennial to Gen X, okay? I do have some Gen Z people in my audience and some Gen Y in my audience, which I'm glad that I do, and I obviously have some older people as well. I love every single one of my subscribers. I love the fact you're subscribed. Even if you watch sometimes to just to complain, it's okay. I don't mind you guys commenting. I don't mind you guys, obviously I want to hear what you guys have got to say. But you can't discount the work that's being done by other conservative influencers who have also actually gone through with the actual process of going to these colleges. I felt at first that Steven Crowder's Change My Mind segments would ultimately backfire, but after a while, I realized that those Change My Mind segments are actually pretty well productive, and I'm glad that Steven went forward with that. Now, with that there out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the rest of the video. Yeah, you've got to actually marry these women, okay? You've actually got to do that. I understand that right now marriage is not exactly popular, especially given all the advantages that ladies have, especially when it comes to divorce. But the fact of the matter is, and me personally, I'm still very much a fan, very much in favor of marriage. I'm in favor of the right marriages. But the thing is this right here, at some point in time, you're going to have to marry these ladies, and just figure out, toss it out there. Okay, guys, this right here is an article from back in 2017 from Forbes. Now check this out. We probably should have seen this coming. It's a big reason why it is. I think this entire thing is a bit of a fad. Of course, this right being wokeness, and it's just a fad that they just continue to keep pushing out there. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of this. There's been much talk about the millennial generation being entitled, lazy, and narcissistic. And while millennials like myself were busy fending off harsh criticisms and stereotypes constantly flowing at our generation, a whole new demographic has was slowly emerging from the shadows. Hello, Generation Z, the fiscally responsible, tattoo-hating, Republican-leaning group touted by conservatives as their best hope for the future, as the antithesis of millennials. While millennials still remember cassette players and dial-up internet, Generation Z grew up hounded by perpetual terrorist threats and school shootings reflecting on them from their MacBook and their iPad screens. This is actually true, and the media, of course, accidentally made this a lot worse with panic. And a lot of Gen Z types are actually picking up weapons too. They're also going out and learning to shoot. Of course, this does not include the soy boys like the Sisson brothers, but still at the same time, obviously this type of thing will make somebody a little bit more conservative, at least in those types of areas. They grew up watching millennials entering the workforce with thousands of dollars in school debt, and it seems they are intent on not making the same mistakes as us. According to research, Gen Z is more individualistic, more conservative, and both socially and fiscally. I wonder why that's the case. Now, guys, you probably think to yourself, Gen Z, you see all the wokeness, you see all the college students. Well, a lot of those are ladies and feminist men. I've been to the university before and have seen exactly how a lot of men view the wokeness stuff, how they view feminism. They think it's actually quite toxic. I had several conversations with these guys on several occasions. Even though there was a major age gap between myself and them, they saw this. And I'm going to talk about black males here towards the end of the video because obviously the LGBTQ push is obviously pushing a lot of black males into conservatism as well. By the way, most black people actually are socially conservative. They just typically tend to vote Democrat. The reason why, of course, has got to do with government subsidies. It's got to do with the economic policies that allow a lot more. I'm not trying to say that black people are lazy or anything. That's not what I'm saying, okay? What I'm saying is they typically tend to be poor. So therefore, they're probably going to find yourself probably asking for more, let's just say, more governmental benefits. But let's go ahead and continue on. According to research, Gen Z is, I've already read that. I said, those born in 1995 or later is possibly the most conservative generation since World War II, and it's worrying, that their impact has been completely overlooked during this election. While our fears might be preemptive, we should not make the mistake of disregarding the intriguing yet possibly worrying worldviews of Generation Z. There was a guy, by the way, who did a video called This Information. He did a video on Eminem. Basically what he was doing was he was going after Eminem for, how do I say this? Simping for the establishment. Basically saying F Trump, all that stuff. And the studies that were cited was that a lot of young men were more concerned than anything about free speech. Free speech, by the way, used to not be a staple of conservatism. Free speech used to be a staple of really liberalism. Makes you kind of wonder exactly what's going on, but it's always the liberals and it's always the left that are trying to shut down free speech and religion as well. I mean, cancel culture, that right there's a thing of the left. They're the ones who took advantage of it. Oftentimes, millennials have been criticized for being notoriously liberal, but it looks like the generation right behind us has completely rebelled. The AUK study at the Guild did a survey of almost 2,000 adults and found that on issues like gay marriage, marijuana legalization, transgender rights, and even tattoos, 59% of Gen Z respondents describe their views as conservative and moderate. Now, let me go ahead and hop out from behind the computer and let me go ahead and tell you what I think is really going on here. And here's what I think is really going on. Left-leaning propaganda. You think about it this way here, if you keep pushing people, if you keep pushing certain types of agendas on people, after a while they're going to rebel. Plain and simple. Let me give an example of what I mean. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys who watch this content have probably seen the social justice warrior push in gaming. I've talked about this a lot in previous videos. I've also talked about this in film. And a lot of these Gen Z types, which by the way, I'm going to go ahead and explain the generational gap to you guys one more time. Typically, the silent generation has always been known those who were born 1928 to 1945. Baby boomers, 1946 to 1966. Of course, there are a lot of people who say 45 to 65. I personally disagree with this because I've seen multiple metrics. By the way, the baby boomer generation has got to be the most liberal generation that we ever had. Then you have Gen X, 1965 to 1979. Even though I personally disagree with that, I believe it's probably more 1966 to 1986. Think about it this way here. If you were born in the early 80s, chances are you grew up with a combination of cartoons that range from Transformers to G.I. Joe to eventually Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Chances are you got exposed to rap music, especially gangster rap music in the 90s. Tupac, Notorious B.I.G., eventually Puff Daddy. Chances are you got exposed to that. And you also got exposed to some of the most violent films that we ever had, at least in that time frame in the early 90s. It was when Bill Clinton was in office, and the culture, for the most part, still felt pretty well carefree. However, there's a very good chance that you heard your boomer parent, or maybe even your Gen X parent, have some concerns about stuff like, say, AR-15 bans and things like that. There, young workers going to work. Also, something else, too. It's also very possible that a lot of these young men are saying, screw college altogether. Let me explain how things work with college. Seeing how it is, I've been to college 3 times total, well, really 4 times total in my life. I've succeeded 3 of those times. The first time was a failure. But let me help you out with this really quick. Typically, when you go to college to get a degree. correct. You typically tend to not only get a degree, but you also tend to at the same time try to find a job after said degree. And a lot of times you don't find work in the area of expertise you went to school with. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes you get an internship. Sometimes that internship keeps you on. Sometimes it does not. I worked an internship back in 2014 at a law firm. And when my internship was over with, they told me I could have the job. However, the pay was not going to be worth anything. And seeing how it was that I was driving, I would say a grand total of about 45 minutes that day. The price of gas was kind of high, and I could not afford a vehicle that was better on gas. I chose to just go ahead and go back to college, use it for my law enforcement certification. And maybe at some point in time I could get a job as being a police officer. Of course, that did not happen. And even though I did graduate from the academy, of course, it took me 2 attempts because of an injury. The first time I went through, it obviously did not occur. And it was probably better for me that it did not occur because at the time I don't think I had the temperament to be a cop, especially in today's society, in today's world, especially as being back in 2015, you were able to deal with stuff like Ferguson and Trayvon Martin had been the previous year, which didn't involve law enforcement, but I'm pretty sure you guys kind of get the gist. Law enforcement's been kind of maligned, has been getting more and more maligned, especially when Obama was in office. But here's the deal. A lot of these college kids, or a lot of these kids are now saying that college just really and truly isn't worth it. You go to college, you can't get a job in the field. Next thing you know, you get a lot of debt. A lot of kids are just saying, screw this, we're just not going to go. A lot of these universities, by the way, are in fact liberal as hell. Let me go back in time. I went to college back in 2008 the first time. I was a bit of an idiot. I did not exactly know what I was doing. It was supposed to be online classes. I had everything taken care of and ended within a few months. I had a very, very low GPA. I went back a year later at the same state community college, went to school for about a year, upped my GPA from that 0, which, by the way, I was running a semester behind, and didn't really go anywhere. So then I went back to college a third time. Actually, I think I've been to college 5 times. I apologize. Failed the first 2 times. First time I kind of don't count. But I went back to college, this time at a different school. It was actually a tougher school when I was a little bit older. As a matter of fact, I recommend everybody go to college, not when they turn 18, but go to college when they hit their 20s. You typically tend to be a little bit smarter, know a little bit more about the world itself, know a little bit more about the issues of the world. You're better prepared in your 20s than you are 18. 18 years old, you're leaving high school from the suburb and going straight to college, and therefore your mind is a little bit easier to manipulate, especially when it comes to the left, because they say a lot of things that quite frankly sound good. Free healthcare, free this, free that, just free crap altogether. Next thing you know, you got people working their ass off to get free crap, which really is just a higher indication that they're really just secretly freeloaders. But still, at the same time, I'm pretty sure you guys are kind of picking up on what I'm saying. A lot of people go to college nowadays, and guess what? They just don't want, they just see how it's the only thing it's going to lead to is massive student loan debt. They also probably hear their parents complain about it, especially if they're working class. Now, going back to my college days, I eventually went back in 2011, graduated, got a paralegal degree, went back later on with the law enforcement academy, graduated that there, and then eventually went back to college a third time for recreational therapy, transferred over to a university, did recreational therapy, and then eventually got into psychology, and I eventually got my degree in sports studies with psychology. It took me a while to adjust, but by the time I went to college at that point in time, I already knew a lot more about the world because I had also worked a lot of jobs, especially a lot of retail jobs. That's something else too to consider, is that a lot of these kids are working jobs to get that extra money even when they're in college, and they're only getting maybe 12 to 20 hours a week. Well, you got to learn to make that money stretch, especially if parents are a little bit more strict and they're not exactly giving you the cash that you may desperately desire to go party with on weekends. People see that, hey, look, the real world is definitely a real thing. You got to be fiscally conservative. You've got to stretch your money. That has also probably got something to do with it as well. And then to go on top of that, what I mentioned earlier about left-leaning propaganda, the constant woke push, you're probably going to see some friction and some pushback. So it does not surprise me that young men age 17, about to turn 18, about to go into the actual real world are becoming a little bit more conservative, especially given some of the things that we have seen in the classroom and seeing the push. And I've done videos on that there too. The real reason why the Democratic Party wants this hardcore left push in schools is because they know they will not have the children going forward to cancel out any Republican. As I mentioned earlier that I would talk about black males, and I'm going to be very, very brief with this right here. Black males are also starting to become more conservative as well. A lot of this has got to do with the LGB push. By the way, that group is starting to divorce itself. We'll probably do a video on that at a later date. Fact of the matter is that black males are starting to see this as well. Now, why in the world would this actually concern the current uniparty establishment. Well, here's the reason why. Back in 2008, the John McCain campaign, and my opinions on John McCain is that he was a very, very liberal Republican. I didn't view him as a conservative or anything. I don't think he would have won in 2008. But one of the problems that the McCain campaign had was that they could not get women. So you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, Donald Trump didn't do well with women either. In 2016, he actually won white women. He actually won white women in 2020 as well, but he did not do well with black women. Well, I'll talk about black women very, very briefly, but typically most, not all, typically tend to be working a job with some form of entitlement coming in. So as I mentioned before, the entitlement pickup is obviously going to be much, much more important to that area, especially if you're poor. Now, my feeling on entitlements is this here. I think there should be a work requirement in welfare. There should be a work requirement in WIC. When it comes to VA and Social Security, I am not I'll put it this way here. If you did time in the military and you're getting paid compensation, which by the way I am too, I'm not going to lie to you, that is your money. You put yourself on the line for your nation. That is your cash. That is your money. That is your benefit. Social Security, if you paid such and such amount in tax dollars into Social Security working and you reach a certain age where you've got to retire, then yes, I'm okay with you having your Social Security. It's one of the reasons why I think people talk about cutting Social Security is a very, very bad idea. The fact of the matter is this right here, though. Black women typically tend to be more on the side of accepting some form of entitlement. Also, same thing, you can also include white women in that category as well. I can already hear somebody screaming, racist. This racist is talking about this. No. Women, oftentimes, especially single mothers, may be more inclined to take government subsidies or as in government entitlements. The reason why that is the case is because obviously they're raising kids. And there are some women out there who did, in fact, get pregnant by pure, total, literal scumbags. Now, I know I talked about the 2008 John McCain presidential campaign and how they were having a problem with women. Now, one of the reasons why they took Sarah Palin is to kind of alleviate some of that, to kind of get the base out. But here's the point that I wanted to make. McCain was doing extremely well with men at that time. Now, you can't win elections with just men and men alone. You just can't do it because it's impossible to do. However, that's changed. If you can get young men to go out there with the typical men, and you can also throw black men with Hispanic men, which, by the way, that's also happening there too, you stand a better chance if you add married couples, as in married women, and the single women that you can get. It stands a very, very big possibility that you might be able to run up the table and win the next set of elections. You might be able to win them in massive landslides. Typically, it's white men with a handful of Hispanic men. Well, if you add more Hispanic men with white men, and then you add a lot of black men to go along with that, with the married ladies or married couples, next thing you know, you've got an actual voter base that can cancel out wherever the hell the other side throws at you. That right there is what we're actually looking at, and I think this could very, very well be a problem. However, I did say that this right also fuels the crisis with the young men. You see, I've been saying for a long time, due to the fact that we've basically got the precursors of World War III going on right now, and seeing how it is that we have a very, very bad economy. I don't care what anybody says, but when you can only get 12 to 20 hours a week and you've got to take a second job, the economy is not very good, and especially given all the inflation and the fact that nobody can buy an electric car, even though they keep telling you to get one. And I've already voiced my opinion on that in this channel on multiple occasions. If you can't afford it, then obviously you're not going to be able to own one. The thing is this right here. We're looking at a crisis where men are not going to be able to get jobs, and we also don't have anything that's going to keep these men, at home. A lot of these free individualistic men may feel the need to actually join the military if something happens. So I do expect a massive military buildup in the near future. Also, to go on top of that, if this right here is the case, it's also going to create a gap in marriages between women and men. Now, you've noticed I haven't really spent a whole lot of time talking about the ladies. Well, the reason why is because obviously the women are going to a much, much more liberal area. They've been told that abortion is health care when in reality it's not health care. They've conditioned these ladies to think that abortion is a form of birth control. That right there is actually what's happened. All you got to do is just bring up Roe v. Wade. Next thing you know, these ladies want to suddenly go vote Democrat, which is very, very weird because I really and truly don't know that many women that are actually liberal. Not in the way that the Democratic Party or the far-left radicals want them to be. Of course, you see these extremely unattractive girls with the green hair and the nose rings and all that crap there, and you're all overweight and all that type of stuff there, and you automatically think to yourself, my God, what the hell happened to women? Men are starting to see this, especially young men, and they're starting to get turned off by this. Fact of the matter is that feminism created this problem, or materialism mixed with feminism obviously created this issue. And as a result of this, you see men now wanting to become much, much more conservative and starting to feel much, much more conservative. Not to mention what the hell is going on in the classrooms. And then to go on top of this, and this right here is where I'm going to kind of go ahead and end this section of the video at. A lot of these young men are also gamers. It was Milo Yiannopoulos who said that a lot of these young gamers are actually left-leaning. These left-leaning gamers are now becoming right-leaning. Now, why is that the case? Well, if you keep screwing around and you keep putting politics in gaming, keep putting politics in sports and things like that, after a while, people are going to begin to push back. And that right there is part of what you've got. Also, something else, too, cult classic films like, say, Fight Club and American Psycho and stuff, they're starting to come back into play, which I think is a completely different can of worms, which I'll probably do videos on in the near future. But I haven't decided yet if I'm going to create a different channel for that. But then again, though, I've already created the additional accounts, which I was going to talk more about in the update section of this video. But the fact of the matter is that feminism and the left is actually creating more conservatives. On the surface, that right there looks like a very good thing. But as I've mentioned on several occasions, when you got a lot of these young women who suddenly don't want to date these young men, and next thing you know, these young men are looking at a situation where they may have to join the military, and then they can't hold down a relationship or a marriage or whatnot, or not going to be able to, especially at a very young age. It's going to create a massive age gap when it comes to marriage. Which leaves me with my final thought. And I know I said that this section of the video. Let me go ahead and say this, because I do think it's very important. If you are a Republican politician, if you are a conservative politician, what you may want to consider doing from now on is focus. Focus your campaign on married couples, white working class, black males, Hispanics, and Asians. Every other platform outside of young men are way, and I mean way too damn irrational and not with any logic at all, and you're never going to win those people over. And that right there, my friends, is my final thought on this topic. Now, let me go and give you guys a couple of quick updates. Videos like this right here are going to be more common on Tuesdays and on Thursdays and on Saturdays. Hopefully get videos out like this before. I know I said that I was going to give you guys I was going to start transitioning a lot of this content into video essays that would involve a lot of movies and stuff. What'll probably happen is I'll probably reference those movies, but I was going to create another channel, which, by the way, I've already created separate accounts because I did plan on expanding the channel itself into more overall topics. I'll try to link one or two of those in the description box for you guys to check out on your own. That's probably where we're going to put that stuff at. And then there's also going to be a character analysis channel that, quite frankly, I'm trying to create as well because, let's be honest, we all love movie and film and gaming characters and all that stuff there. And I wanted to dive more into that. So expect to see more content like that in the future. If you guys can, make sure you guys hit that like button for the algorithm. Please hit the subscribe button. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button. Also, hit the notifications bell. Share the video. Leave a comment in the comment section. I would love to get you guys' thoughts, and I shall see you guys later.